Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see that everyone's from Delhi. So, before I personally and officially invite all our panelists, let me just give a brief of the format that we propose to follow. Both our senior panelists, that's Honorable Justice Prathiba Singh and Advocate Nappinai, will be given 10 minutes for their opening comments, followed by Rohan and Aprajita, who will be given 5 minutes each. This will be followed by my questions, and finally, we'll be taking questions from the audience. Our first speaker today is Honorable Justice Prathiba Singh, and ma'am, I'd like to briefly invite you and welcome you to this event. And ma'am, your contribution towards development of intellectual property rights in India is significant to say the least. From advising many a parliamentary committee entrusted to develop and frame India's IP policy, you have been instrumental in framing India's IP policy. Above all, your effort to nurture the younger members of the legal community is reflected in their adulation and reverence towards you. Therefore, for all the audience, without further ado, let me invite Honorable Justice Prathiba Singh for her opening address.
Very good morning to all of you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Advocate Nappinai, the senior most panelist with me, and Shivshankar, my young colleagues from the bar, the organizing committee from the Kerala Blockchain Academy. You know, the last 4 days have been kind of, apart from my judicial work, I've been dreaming and living blockchain. So it's been an amazing period, and I must say I'm completely floored by the entire concept of the Kerala Blockchain Academy itself, because I didn't know such an academy even existed till 1 week ago. And I must really commend the government of Kerala for having even taken up this initiative through their institution, that is the IIIT Kerala. And I think it is very natural that the first block of the blockchain had to start from the lowermost part of the country. And I'm sure it will kind of replicate, and we will see blockchains going from Kerala to Jammu and Kashmir very soon. And I must compliment everybody for this amazing event, which has taken place in the last 2 years. I did get to see some clippings of it on the internet. And I'm glad to be here, and thank you, Shivshankar, for having introduced me to this academy. And Nappinai, of course, I've known you and I've met you many times before. And your prowess in this field is also quite well known to me. And it's wonderful to be on this platform. When I had to write a speech, I obviously wanted to understand what blockchain meant and everything. So I did know some things about blockchain in terms of a technology, but the way it works technically wasn't known to me. So how the the hash functions are created, and how the keys are generated, and how the entire authentication and verification process itself takes place is something that I technically and technologically tried to understand this week. But I don't want to make my speech very technical, because I'm not sure of the kind of audience that we have here today. I really wish we could have been in Kerala for doing this academy. If not for Corona, I'm sure next year there'll be a chance. But knowing that the audience could be consisting of a mixed kind of audience, which could be law students, lawyers, technical people. So I've kind of looked at it from a person who has some knowledge of IP and kind of a lay person kind of perspective. So I have a little written speech here, which I hope, because Shivshankar was very particular, I have to finish in 10 minutes. I decided I'm going to write down what I'm going to speak. So I have got it written, but I'll just add my comments in between. So the perspective that I would like to give to you all about blockchain is in my speech, which I'm going to read out just now. In ancient times, when democratic societies were yet to evolve and provinces were ruled by chieftains, local kings or emperors, messages that were to be conveyed from one king to another or from one chieftain to another were sent through a series of messengers. The recipient of the message would first check the authenticity of the message and verify the genuinity of the messenger by asking for a code. And I'm sure these we've seen in our old movies, etc., and in our old legends and books and comics which we used to read. It is only if the messenger was able to give the correct code that the message would be treated as authentic. In modern society, such verification is done by establishments such as defense services, intelligence operations, and investigative agencies by using different types of codes and keys. We all know these. In the last 30, 40 years, there are codes and keys which have been used. And I'm sure these were used even during the world wars when people had to communicate with each other. This code and key combination has also found its application in the dark web, where it is also used by unscrupulous elements for trading of arms, drugs, or even hawala transactions. But this has completely now changed. And on the fundamental basis of codes and keys, the conversion of this real world code key function for the purposes of verifying and authenticating transactions on the internet by using a series of entries in a ledger is the basis of blockchain technology. The said blockchain technology, of which the audience here has greater knowledge than me, is used for various transactions. It is common knowledge that Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrency are based on blockchain technology. Without going into the technical aspects of blockchain technology, suffice it to say that the said technology is now being used in various banking and finance related applications. Its use has also expanded into the insurance industry. Estimates suggest that there are more than 100 million users of blockchain technology worldwide. Apart from banking and finance related industries, blockchain technology is also being explored and used and developed for purposes of various applications such as issuance of birth certificates, tracking of convicts, maintenance of land records, streaming of transactions relating to vehicles, and even for the purposes of maintenance and growth of tree saplings in Delhi. Several states such as Andhra Pradesh, Delhi, Telangana, Karnataka, Jharkhand, and God's own country, Kerala, have announced policies for integrating blockchain technology in governance, or they are in the process of doing so. When the organizers of this event contacted me for addressing this audience, I needed to open a whole new world for myself. My team of law researchers and interns attached to my chamber were asked to prepare notes on this technology. Even my son, who is an engineer, was not spared from making his contribution to explain the technical aspects of this technology. One cannot claim an in-depth knowledge of this complex technology. However, from a legal point of view, blockchain technology raises several questions in one's mind. The first and the foremost question that blockchain transactions would raise is that there are no borders, and hence jurisdiction becomes a vexed issue, just like in the case of the internet. Though verification and authentication is the fulcrum of this technology, there is no enforcement in a court of law. How does one enforce this in a court of law? It depends upon public and private keys allotted to users and their interface with the hash function. Mistakes cannot be corrected, and hence the entire jurisprudence under the Indian Contract Act relating to mistake of fact or law is alien to these transactions. How is one to be held to a promise made in an entry in a ledger? When does the promisor and the promisee relation get established? These are all questions for which answers would have to be found. What happens if a private key is misused or is tampered with? Are there any legal remedies? One doesn't know. There is no central authority which monitors blockchain technology. However, recent adaptations of blockchain technology are being used by governmental authorities for verifying and authenticating ownership of movable and immovable assets. One of them has in fact been, faced with some resistance in the court in Telangana, from what I understand. What are the responsibilities of such an authority? How is privacy of the users to be guaranteed, especially when there's possibility of leakage of data or hacking of data? We need to find answers, and the forums such as this one are the forums for finding answers. One of the defining moments for blockchain technology was the judgment of the Supreme Court in Internet and Mobile Association versus Reserve Bank of India, which set aside the ban imposed by the Reserve Bank on bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. A perusal of this judgment would show that the court was mindful of various aspects, including the fundamental rights of persons involved in dealing with bitcoins. The court clearly held that while regulation of this trade would be within the domain of the RBI, banning of the same would be violative of fundamental rights. The budget speech of the then Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, given on 1st February 2018, finds reference in the judgment. It was said in that speech that while the government would denounce use of crypto assets to finance illegitimate activity, it will definitely explore the use of blockchain technology for ushering the digital economy. The announcement of use of blockchain technology for ushering the digital economy marked the arrival of this technology on the national stage. The court found that the RBI's acceptance of this technology and rejection of cryptocurrency was actually a paradox. Justice Ramasubramaniam judgment said this is a paradox that on the one hand, you accept BT, but you would reject cryptocurrency. Another important aspect of blockchain technology is the prescribing of standards. There are no globally acceptable standards, either governmental or non-governmental, for the purpose of creating these applications. In the absence of standards, the technology is likely to be used in the dark web for indulging in criminal activities. Even today, it is happening. The blockchain technology, therefore, has two faces, the yin and the yang. For it to be technologically viable, acceptable, and easily usable, various steps would have to be taken at the international and national level for creation of global standards, use, and implementation of blockchain technology. Let us rewind a little bit. You know, at the beginning of the internet, there were various apprehensions about the manner in which it would work. I remember when we all used to live through this, even as IP attorneys in the early 90s, we all used to wonder how would trademarks be protected on the internet? How will, counterfeiting be stopped on internet? So, but various tools have been employed over the last 20 years to ensure that the internet operates in a structured manner. The content on internet is not regulated, but the architecture of the internet is clearly defined. The role of private individuals, organizations, as also commercial enterprises in creating this structure is absolutely commendable. Whether it is the governance of the ICANN, participation in ICANN related activities, licensing for registrars of domain names, adjudication mechanisms such as online disputes through the Uniform Dispute Resolution Policy, the path was laid and it is working very, very effectively. More than 80,000 disputes of domain names have been just decided on online complaint mechanisms. The biggest achievement of the internet is that it is regulated without actually being regulated by any governmental authority. There is accountability and answerability, though owing to the complex issues, it's always a work in progress. Similarly, for blockchain technology to succeed and to enjoy legitimacy, the first and the foremost requirement is laying down of standards. All players and stakeholders ought to be consulted at an international level to lay down standards. Unregulated technology can pose enormous risks, especially in the banking and the finance sector. The recognition of technology and applications based on blockchain, which are not involved in illegal, nefarious, or unlawful activities, would be the first step to ensure that this technology becomes a boon and not a bane. There are various positive uses which blockchain technology can be put to. Each of us is aware of the number of times we have to submit our identification cards. I recall very clearly, every time you open a bank account, they will ask you for a cancelled check, they'll ask you for an Aadhaar card, they'll ask you for all your certificates, your licenses, and even for the smallest of functions, these have to be submitted repeatedly. And please imagine the amount of manpower which is spent on verification and authentication of these documents across the country in various institutions again and again and again. This can be completely eliminated by using blockchain technology. The submission of one identification should mean automatic authentication and of all the data relating to an individual. Similarly, verification of banking transactions across multiple bank accounts can be made easy. E-commerce transactions, insurance, all this could be connected together through blockchain technology. The power of mathematical applications in the collection, authentication, verification, and use of large amounts of data can be realized with blockchain technology. This technology also can have various applications in the legal field, especially in simplifying transactional work. Smart contracts, for instance, could be used to automate payment in transactions involving sale and purchase of goods upon satisfaction of conditions. Lawyers could also use this technology to store legal data instead of emailing sensitive personal data back and forth. There are nearly 112 patent applications in blockchain technology that have been published in India. Transactions using this technology can be used to resolve contractual disputes, consumer disputes, and even disputes under the Negotiable Instruments Act. However, presently, I'm not aware of any mechanism to deal with them at this point. Now, let's come to a subject which is very close to my heart. That's intellectual property. There are two dimensions of blockchain technology. One, whether it is entitled to any form of protection. And secondly, who would be owning the IP in this technology and its implementations. As you all know, BT is a large conglomeration of data, which could even be construed as a database or even a software-based database. And it could be a literary work under the Copyright Act. The foundation of this technology being computer software, various jurisdictions in the world have also granted patents for most of the innovative implementations of blockchain technology. Companies such as IBM, MasterCard, Bank of America own several patents in blockchain technology. However, the question arises as to whether these applications are even patentable. In India, the provision which would immediately come to one's mind is Section 3K of the Indian Patents Act. The Delhi High Court in Farid Alani versus Union of India had the opportunity to consider computer program-based inventions, and in that context, the court had observed that bar of Section 3K is not on all inventions based on computer programs. In today's digital world, most inventions are based on programs. It would be retrograde to argue that all such inventions would not be patentable. Innovations in the field of artificial intelligence, blockchain technologies, and other digital products would be based on computer programs. However, they would not be non-patentable simply for that reason. It is today rare to see a product without a computer program, whether it's a car, whether it's any other automobile, a microwave oven, a washing machine, a refrigerator. Almost all of them have computer programs built in them. Thus, digital and electronic products have to be protected in some form. And so long as the implementation has a technical contribution and it has a hardware-based application, then the bar on patent on this kind of technology would not apply. Do you know, if you look at the history of this provision, in fact, the Joint Parliamentary Committee had said that the words per se in Section 3K have been included because programs may per se not be patentable, but if they include other things such as ancillary products which are developed thereon, they would be given patents. And you know, our inspiration to this provision is from Article 52 of the European Patent Convention, which uses the words as such. Historically, the insertion of 3K took place in 2002. A joint parliamentary committee which considered the Patent Amendment Bill observed that computer programs per se are not patentable. And this was again followed up in 2005 when the Statement of Objects and Reasons said clearly that when software-related inventions have technical application to industry or are in combination with hardware, the bar would not apply. In fact, one author, Adarsh Ramanujam, a lawyer, has recently opined in the context of Section 3K that addition of the words per se is clarificatory in nature after a reading of the parliamentary committee report. And this would mean that per se would have to be read for algorithms, for business methods, and for mathematical methods. And therefore, so long as there is a technical contribution or it is used in combination with hardware, EU, UK, etc., we all follow the same kind of jurisprudence on this. In the US, of course, the Alice judgment of the Supreme Court of US would be the applicable judgment, and I'm sure all of you can check that judgment out. So the question that arises in everyone's mind is that would a blockchain technology-based patent application be granted in India? There cannot be a definitive yes or no to this. It depends on the nature of the invention, what is the technical contribution made, and whether in combination with the hardware, it produces a innovative and a novel result. The question sometimes has also been whether specialized hardware is needed or even general purpose hardware is enough. But that has been decided that even general purpose hardware is sufficient. And this is also clear from the 2005 amendments. So the question as to now who would own the IP would also be a vexed question. And it would depend on the contractual arrangements between developers, etc. This would fall under the provisions of the IT Act. The banning of cryptocurrency bill, the draft of which is in public domain, would be a legislation to watch out for. Use of blockchain technology for research Various countries such as Japan and Australia have leased bitcoins and other digital currencies, exchanges, and ought to be recognized and used. I would only conclude by saying that technology is like water. Its flow cannot be stopped. Only dams can be built to make use of its power for the benefit of mankind. Blockchain technology is no exception to this. The technical aspects of blockchain technology need not be understood by one and all. We have the engineers for that. I would commend the IITM Kerala for the creation of this academy and the organization of such events. Thank you for listening to me patiently.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Um, Thank you for setting the premise of this session by touching upon some of the most significant developments in the last year or so. And for the information of the audience, we have to give credit for the Farid Alani judgment to ma'am itself. So I have to put it up.
Distribute limited to only a storing of transactions kind of a function. Yes, it is immutable, it is traceable, it has no central authority. All these characteristics are there, but it has a huge potential beyond recording of transactions. So far, blockchain technology has received a lot of attention, both on the positive side as well as the negative side. A lot of negative attention has been attached, especially as far as the Indian regulators are concerned, on the cryptocurrency or the virtual currency side. But it's important to know that there is a section within the government and potential of this blockchain and has a very favorable outlook towards this technology. Honorable Justice Singh talked about use cases which have actually been implemented, looked at maintenance of records, vehicle registrations, etc. But I think to me, being a practitioner in the fintech space, the biggest beneficiary of blockchain is the fintech sector, which comprises of not only the banks and the big techs, but also the insurance and the other telecom players. I think from our perspective, blockchain solutions, in order to bring speed, security, transparency, and traceability, there are all to a blockchain technology are tried to managed by bringing in a certain permissioned based blockchain framework where participants for trade finance and the use case. I sincerely believe that this technology is borderless and it is going to help bring frictionless payments within our domain, which reduces transaction fees but increases the speed at which these transactions happen. Currently, if you look at the mechanism where you have to transfer payments between different jurisdictions, there is a heavy dependency which the sector has on banks and financial intermediaries. What blockchain does is reduce the role of these intermediaries in the cross-border payments, as there is no central authority, and it also adds to the security of the transactions. This is as far as the technology in the fintech. Add on with the discussion into two broad in terms of highlighting the risks and cautioning the users of the downside of having a virtual currency which has characteristics of let's say a currency, but it still doesn't fulfill the RBI test of a legal tender. Justice Singh talked about the bill which has been introduced by the Interministerial Committee. That I think is an initiative to promote a central bank digital currency, a digital form of fiat currency, but at the same time imposes restrictions on private players to bring out their virtual currencies. I think all in all, I think Honorable Justice Singh talked about the RBI directive, where there have been restrictions in the past imposed by the central bank on banks to deal in virtual currencies. Thankfully, that has been struck down by the Supreme Court. But I think it is important to recognize that the Supreme Court, while striking down the directive, recognized the wide extensive powers of the regulator to regulate financial systems. It may have struck down the RBI directive on the ground of proportionality, but I think it still recognizes that the central bank is here to stay as far as financial system is concerned. So I think that, from our perspective, is important. Span across jurisdictions because of the distributed ledger technology, because of there being no territoriality to this technology. There are issues pertaining to cross-border payments, which come under the domain of foreign exchange management laws. In terms of how does one person who's transacting and trading in a virtual currency realize whether he's doing a cross-border transaction or is it a local transaction? I think the mechanisms will need to be put in place by stakeholders in the industry as far as anti-money laundering laws is concerned. There are laws pertaining to payment systems. There are issues there. RBI as the central bank offers its guidance and provides a license to the regulated entities to operate payment systems. So the question which will always arise is, if we are to legalize virtual currencies, are they operating payment systems? What is the nature of this token or this currency, so to speak? Is this in the nature of a security or a commodity? Is this to be regulated by the SEBI? So I think there are a lot of open questions as far as the law and the regulation is concerned. I think from our perspective, I think as lawyers, I think it is important to understand that all laws currently in place trust place in a certain centralized agency or a regulator. Any change in these frameworks will require a massive shift where there will need to be recognition of a certain model which recognizes decentralization, which tries to weed out issues as Honorable Justice mentioned about jurisdiction in terms of where does the transaction conclude, what is the situs of the transaction. And unless and until we are able to solve these issues, these complications which arise out of blockchain technology will remain. I'm hopeful that the regulatory approach to not only blockchain technology, but virtual currencies will change in the times to come. Yes, there is uncertainty in the space, but I think I'm confident that with partnerships and stakeholder discussions like the current discussion which we are having, and if we promote awareness and the benefits of this technology, there will be an initiative by the government to not only introduce blockchain technology in spheres which are relevant to government, but also embrace this technology and realize its full potential. Government should be mindful that if it waits for perfect solutions without exploring the opportunity of using this technology, it could miss this opportunity. Honorable Justice Singh talked about smart contracts. Yes, smart contracts is a way to automate execution of contracts. It required to fulfill a valid contract. There is a very important principle of consensus ad idem. There is a meeting of minds. So the question which will arise is, when you talk about smart contracts, which are actually code or software program generated contracts, how do we meet those essentials? All in all, I would want to conclude by saying that there is hope that this blockchain technology not only results in changes which are brought in our day-to-day lives, but it also brings efficiencies which are intended to be met by this decentralized platform. And I hope during the course of the discussion today, we are able to find some solutions and some proposals which we can, as stakeholders, build and start, I think, venturing with the government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohan. Next, I'd like to invite Aprajita. Aprajita, we request you to kindly stick to the time limit because we're already at 12:30. And Aprajita is going to further add to the regulatory part of the blockchain framework in India?
Thank you so much, Shiv. And I hope I'm audible clearly. And very happy to be here on this distinguished panel. It's always nice to see a majority women participation on a technology law panel. And so I think that's a plus from the word go. And I think it's also, as Justice Singh ma'am mentioned, it's great what the Kerala Academy is doing, because I think internationally also there's a lot of consensus about how, when the development of the internet happened. Even today, we have a lot of gaps in our understanding about what are the various regulatory areas that we can focus on when it comes to the digital medium. I think development of fintech, development of even blockchain technology, these are all extensions of the gap areas or the progression that were possible with the digital medium. And today we are looking at a scenario where we need to discuss what should be the appropriate law for this kind of technology. So I think just like regulatory developments for internet and for transaction in the digital medium took a very long period of time, even today there's lots that can be done. I think at that point of time, there was a lot of collaboration between engineers, between lawyers, people who are developing these applications and people who understand the risk associated with these applications to get together and understand that how should the law continue to be relevant. Because the solution for a hesitation from the legal framework cannot be that innovation has to stop. And I think it's great that institutes like Kerala Blockchain Academy are working in that area, because of course the audience that we have today includes academia, people from the judiciary, people in the industry, developers, lawyers like us. And this is a great opportunity for us to understand from cross-jurisdictional and cross-disciplinary area as to what should be the right way to go forward. As some of my panelists also mentioned, blockchain technology is something that I think has various facets. Today, I'm going to talk about one particular aspect that is interesting to me, and I think that requires a bit more work internationally as well as in India. So I think a lot of times how we understand privacy internationally as well as in India is always that there is a general understanding or an assumption that privacy somehow compromises innovation. So I think that is a fallacy, because definitely there is a possibility to develop technology to the extent possible. And privacy law itself is pretty dynamic. Today we have a very extensive regulation in Europe, which many of you would know about, which is the EU GDPR. And countries like India and even US are taking inspiration from that. So I would say even privacy law is on a developing trajectory. So this is the right time to come up with a technology like blockchain, because honestly, I believe that privacy regulators are ready to listen as to what is it that we can do better. So I think my personal view is that it's how privacy law will treat blockchain is a bit complex, because while there are some commonalities in terms of security of data that blockchain manages to attain, there are also some privacy principles that blockchain fails to address. So I think I'm going to just quickly summarize these things so that it could be interesting for some of you to understand that which direction are we supposed to follow when we think about privacy compliance when it comes to blockchain technology. So to my mind, I think generally today, privacy law has a very centralized perspective in mind. So how the law approaches privacy compliance is that we look at every technology from a very controller perspective. There needs to be a decision-making body. There needs to be somebody who's answerable as to what information is being collected, how is it being processed, where is it being stored. And only then can an individual like you and me understand that what is the level of risk that I'm signing up for. And that is the legal interpretation of how protection is to be granted and how privacy compliance is to be maintained. I think blockchain, on the other hand, takes a very different interpretation about how to keep your data private and how to give you protection. So the perspective they have is that forget about privacy. I'm more interested in keeping your data secure. And that security can be obtained by essentially distributing your data, either with you. You will have complete, individual control. Whatever you give is not possible to be changed. There is absolutely nobody who can tamper with that data. And by the technology providing individual control to each person, it cannot get more secure than that, because that ultimately that is what privacy law is all about. Because even what the Supreme Court has talked about is that unless and until we recognize that an individual data subject has control over their data, the fundamental rights of an individual can be breached. So I think that is the dichotomy that regulators have to think about, because the laws are focused on a centralized framework. However, blockchain handles a decentralized framework. And some commonalities, I think, that blockchain manages to attain, general concepts that we talk about when we talk about privacy compliance, things like anonymity. Anonymized data is anyways not regulated under any privacy law. While India is talking about, coming up with a regulation to talk about non-personal data, which arguably could be anonymized. Today, we don't know how the upcoming privacy bill is going to regulate that area. So if we look at personalized data that belongs to people like you and me, especially these identity and these KYC solutions that a lot of blockchain companies are coming up with in India and abroad, I think there is definitely a possibility that this kind of data, if anonymized, you don't really have to worry about the data protection law. However, that is, I think, not a solution that works for all kinds of technologies. In addition, transparency. The fact that all transactions that occur on a ledger are clearly visible to everyone is, I think, something that is great for privacy, because blockchain ensures that there is a certain integrity, there is a certain trust. And instead of trusting a centralized authority, I'm just going to, decentralize the entire trust factor. And I will rely on some people in the network who can make an add-on to the robustness of the network. So I think that is also an example of how blockchain technology aligns with privacy compliance. And of course, the encryption, the cryptography compliance and these kind of measures that they believe in, which I think ultimately provides a lot of control and a lot of security to what data you provide. Having said that, there are a lot of gaps. Today, the current Indian privacy law is the Information Technology Act. Technically, it does apply to blockchain technology, as Justice Prathiba ma'am also mentioned, because it regulates transactions happening in the internet, in the online space. Having said that, when I would advise a blockchain company as to, where exactly do you have to do what you have to do, if someone has an entirely public network, it becomes very challenging for us to apply that law. So while technically it is applicable, but where exactly am I going to allocate the responsibility, I think is a gray area. And so I think going forward, since I'm mindful of the time that I have, I think it's important for innovation not to be curbed, of course. And it's going to be like a journey wherein the privacy law regulators would need to understand that what is the possibility with this technology. I think either side has to give in. Either the law needs to think about privacy compliance and protection from a decentralized framework. And if that is not possible, then unfortunately, blockchain developers need to think about how can we build in privacy compliance in the technology that we are building. So some examples we are already seeing of making sure the data is stored off-chain, for example. There are people who are working on entirely permission networks where there is a lot of protection, there is a lot of consent frameworks, there are knowledge proof frameworks and solutions that are being discussed in the industry. So definitely privacy compliance would not be an issue for all kinds of blockchain applications. And to my mind, the law has to change definitely, but voluntary compliance and self-regulation is a great idea to in order to be able to be better prepared with the eventual reality of regulatory coverage. Because the last thing I wanted to mention is that in terms of what we can expect the regulator to think about data privacy, a lot of you would have heard about the RBI sandbox, wherein they were averse to cryptocurrency. However, they encouraged the setting up of sandboxes so that blockchain developers can come forward and they can enjoy certain relaxations from the general legal compliances that apply to a company, and then they can use that sandbox to develop applications. It's interesting that compliance with cybersecurity and privacy standards was something that was not a relaxation. It was something that RBI expected, that during the sandbox itself, you will have to comply with that. So I think that is a great indication of what the regulator is thinking. India is definitely very obsessed about privacy, and the government finds data very important. So I don't think this is an area in which there's going to be room to maneuver. So it'll be interesting to watch the developments. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry if I've exceeded my timeline. I was watching the clock like a hawk.
Thank you, Aprajita. Now I'd like to invite someone who's been an integral part of the KBA family from the very inception. Advocate Nappinai. She's been an advisor to Triple ITM and KBA. She's an advocate, an author, a commentator, advisor to many a state government, scholar, and of course the founder of Saathi, an organization which is intended to educate and empower people through the awareness of cyber law. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shiv. Justice Prathiba Singh, thanks you so much for that introduction and very warm welcome and a fabulous presentation. And Shiv, thank you for putting me last. I particularly requested for it because then I get the benefit of the perspectives of all the other speakers, which I can then coalesce into a whole and present it from my perspective. And I'm going to try and attempt that now. We've had some very interesting conversations through this panel. We've had the perspective from an intellectual property aspect and also to use cases and data privacy. So when we just step back a moment, and when I also look at some of the questions and also my journey with respect to blockchain, etc., the initial phase was when I had to explain what was blockchain technology. So I can very well relate to Justice Prathiba Singh's concern when she said, I think I'd better keep away from the technology aspects and stick to the legal, because we would rather do that. We'd rather speak about that which we are familiar with. But then I had to first start explaining blockchain technology in terms of judicial training. So when a technologist comes to explain the technology, I can tell you, it just gets more complicated. So you need to address it in a manner where we as lay people can also understand it more in the context of how it is applied rather than in the context of how it is built. And that was my first foray into explaining blockchain technology, in my training sessions. And in those days, I'm talking about nearly more than a decade back or so, the perspective was from the issue of cryptocurrency. It is indeed a fact that blockchain became more familiar. All of us became more familiar with blockchain. If I may use this phrase, it became more popular because of its usage in cryptocurrency. But to assume that blockchain does not have a life of its own without cryptocurrency would be fallacious. Over the last decade, all that has happened clearly demonstrates that it has cut its umbilical cord. It never had it in the first place, but even that which was an assumed or a presumed umbilical cord is now cut. Blockchain exists and thrives independent of cryptocurrencies. So when we have a discussion with respect to both, we could possibly take it in terms of how and in what manner blockchain made cryptocurrency a use case, one of its most successful usages, if I may put it that way, and how it then delineated itself and evolved independent of cryptocurrencies. Today, even in the questions, I was following that, and I'll definitely try to address it within the 10-minute slot given itself. When I look at the questions and look at the kind of issues or concerns that arise, there is an assumption, an automatic a move to again link blockchain with cryptocurrency, and we automatically assume that the questions are interlinked. So even when we talk therefore about law and blockchain, and we talk about the evolution of legal frameworks, the automatic focus then becomes about money laundering. It becomes about whether these kind of alternate forms of payment mechanisms should be permitted. When we speak about fintech also, there is an underlying concern in terms of, in the very first instance, equating fiat currency, including a digitized form of fiat currency, with cryptocurrency, right? So this kind of continuous interlinking, in my opinion, and to a large extent, which we are seeing practically, actually acts as an impediment for the development of blockchain as a technology. If we are really serious about encouraging the innovation and implementation of blockchain as a technology, the very first step mentally and then through legal frameworks or policies, the delineation has to happen, and it has to be a clean cut. It cannot be a cut which is going to keep going back to its parent use case. Unless we do this, we are going to continuously have governments which are going to be deeply concerned about to what extent blockchain usage can be permitted, to what extent may it become a concern, and do we even allow it at all or not? I have already spoken a lot in terms of including in KBA. And in fact, over the last 3 years where I've been addressing sessions for KBA, I have talked very specifically about these various things, which I'm just going to sum up in a minute. One is the importance of understanding how blockchain technology works in cryptocurrencies. You may wonder, she just said delink it. Why is she linking it again, right? Just go back to cryptocurrencies only for the limited purpose of understanding how the use case works and why you need to delineate it, and then look at it differently. Because when blockchain is used in cryptocurrency, the mode and manner in which it functions is very different from when you use the same blockchain technology for various other purposes. I'm not just talking about a decentralized or permissionless to a permission blockchain, etc. All these variations are there, but it goes much deeper than that, and I've addressed it as a 1-hour session in the last KBA, so you could go back to look at that. The next thing is, when we are talking about blockchain and we are talking about tokenization, to what extent are there similarities between tokenization and cryptocurrencies? Is token also a virtual currency? And therefore, does it have to be regulated or looked at with the same lens as cryptocurrencies? And as you have all seen from the IAMAI judgment, it talks about virtual currencies. It just doesn't talk about cryptocurrencies. It moves to the VC construct there. So the minute you look at virtual currency, it becomes a much wider application. In fact, when I addressed this topic in my book, I first started off with this explanation about how cryptocurrencies would probably form part of the larger genus of virtual currencies, and they in turn could even be categorized as digital currencies, an even larger framework, right? When you look at these boxes, and you understand how you delineate them and whether there is a possibility of delineation, then creating a legal framework becomes very easy. What seems very complicated, what seems insurmountable, actually becomes very, very simple. It is because of this continuous linking and the fear factor that cryptocurrencies bring up that blockchain, including as a permissionless blockchain or a much more decentralized and wider framework, suffers. Today, we are looking at a situation where a lot of finance and investments are being pumped into blockchain technology. As was already pointed out by Justice Singh, there is a lot of adaptation by governments of this technology. Therefore, there is absolutely no fear, there is no restraint, and there is no concern in terms of accepting the technology. It is only when it comes to cryptocurrencies that concerns arise. And the primary reason that these concerns arise are because of, first and foremost, the kind of threat that a privately issued payment mechanism, unregulated payment mechanism, if I may put it that way, poses to fiat currency. And it is not just to fiat currency, not just to the valuation of fiat currency, but it is actually the threat that it poses to the sovereign itself. One of the inalienable rights of a sovereign is the issuance of currency. And the entire governance of that sovereign entity, of a sovereign nation, is contingent on the control that the sovereign has over fiat currency and the manner in which they can ensure a thriving economy through recognition of the value of fiat currency. So when we talk about alternatives, when we talk about rerouting this kind of a valuation to a privately issued mechanism, then it certainly poses a threat not just to the fiat currency, but to the sovereign itself. So when you ask a question about self-sovereign identity, therefore I was thinking, when we are talking about the threats with respect to sovereign issued fiat currency versus privately issued currencies, and if your question is about self-sovereign identities, are you really looking at an identity document dehorse a sovereign? Are you looking at an identity document which can be self-replicating, but which is facilitated by a sovereign through the use of blockchain technology? Or what exactly do you mean? So you may want to evaluate your question in the perspective of what I just said, that you have to understand that you also trace your identity to a sovereign. Your identity and your very existence is anchored to land which is within a territory which is bound by the laws and regulations of the territory. Much as we may want to live in this virtual world, and I have quoted this Declaration of Independence by John Bartholow, and you may want to go and read that from the book. And he talks about, all ye people of the world, keep away from the world of mind. We may want to do that, but a Declaration of Independence cannot be from us, our virtual reality, from our virtual self. Right? So in one of the interviews to a Japanese publication, I was talking about how all of us, when we sit in front of a computer, may want to talk about self-sovereignty and may want to talk about our rights. But the minute you step away from your computer, outside your home, onto the road, who do you expect to protect you on that road? Who do you expect to do everything for you in terms of governance and regulation and safety? It is the government. So how can you live or function without this protective mechanism that a governance framework gives to you? So when we talk about a governance framework for blockchain also, it's actually emanating from this very same need. We have use cases today. We can have a lot more use cases tomorrow. We have a very limited applicability that is accepted today because of these constraints in terms of how do you make it more open-ended the way cryptocurrency functioned, right? For that, you need a payment mechanism, how you can create an incentivized blockchain. And for that incentivization, you go back and you come a full circle again. That's why to the payment mechanism, and whether it's tokens and whether that's digital currency or not. And the minute you anchor that payment mechanism or an incentive mechanism to fiat currency, you may actually then lose the narrative. So you may want an alternative which is not necessarily just a cash-based or a fiat-based mechanism. So in the larger construct, what is it that we can look for today? One, all of us as developers, and I don't mean to say I'm a developer, I'm just taking us all as a whole, each of us forms a part in this polity. In that part, we all come in to give our contribution. So be it your contribution as a technologist, be it your contribution as a legal person, be it your contribution as a governance agency, right? Which is going to look at bringing in laws or regulations or guidelines. Whoever it may be, we have to look at blockchain as a standalone technology and not about how it can be used, and then delineate the technology from its usage and have laws or regulations which are dynamic to be able to adapt to such evolving use cases. We can't constrain it and constrict it in a manner where it only identifies what is the use case for today and then provide for it. We need to have a long-term perspective because laws are glacial. It takes a lot of time for us to formulate and to also pass it. So you can't go back to the drawing table tomorrow just because, by the time you have drafted the law, by the time it has been passed by Parliament, the technology has changed. Its use case has changed. So that's not how technology or laws for technology can function. We need dynamism. I'm going to actually go back to one of my quotes, which I had used in the last session also, and then address a couple of things that have been raised. I had drawn from Joy B, who in turn had drawn from Thoreau, in terms of Joy talks about it in the perspective of nanotechnologies, and I have rehashed that quote in the perspective of emerging technologies. It's not just for blockchain. Today, we are already talking about blockchain and AI, blockchain and smart cities, blockchain and IoT. So blockchain can play a role in terms of every other possible emerging technology. It's not really a standalone technology solution, and it doesn't have to be. It can evolve into multiple parameters. But in doing so, technology may be propelling us into a new century with no plan, no control, no brakes, and it may now very well be the time for reprising control before we cross the fail-safe point. And when I give this quote, I also use this picture of a speeding car which is just going to run off a precipice, right? And I always tell people, law is like brakes. We would not get into that speeding car, much as I may love my very fancy car or whatever. And for the sake of brevity, I'm going to use the example of a Batmobile. You know, I mean, like ultimate, right? For any car enthusiast, you may want to get into that Batmobile. But if I tell you there are no brakes in that Batmobile, would you even get close to the door? You won't even open the door to get inside, right? So law is like the brakes in a car. It doesn't impede the car. It doesn't slow you down. It doesn't stop innovation. It is actually something which encourages innovation. It enables innovation. So today, when we are looking at a legal framework, we need to look at these things. And this is where we are today in India. 2018, Niti Aayog came out with its AI national policy document, right? We have had two old IoT policy documents and a new one has already come in. We have had policy documents coming from multiple government entities, including for every possible emerging technology, and one small one for blockchain. Two very important developments happened in 2018 itself, apart from AI, was for blockchain. TRAI came out with its proposition for use of blockchain for telecom to ensure transparency and immutability, in fact, right? So these two things which blockchain brings in, transparency and immutability, it needs to be looked at. And when we are talking about, Rohan spoke about fintech, I wanted to take some of that perspective and also bring it into civic tech. We are today talking about civic tech. And that's why I said when we move from 2018 to 2020, and you look at all the policies that are coming forward, you will see this very clear move of the government towards creating a framework which will enable use of technology or growth of technology for common good. Whether it's a utopian mean or whether it is feasible is something that only practical application will show. But this is where the move is. And this is what we need to capture for blockchain also. So today, as did Germany, we need to also look at a national blockchain policy. We need a strategy document. The National Cybersecurity Center, which is attached to the PMO's office, is looking at and is likely to come out with its National Cybersecurity Strategy document for 2020 to 2025. I've presented before them. I've also contributed substantially in it, but it is still pending a release. I would really want to see blockchain addressed in this strategy document too. One of the states for which I am advisor and which I'm very proud to say I'm also from, Tamil Nadu, was not mentioned earlier. So it would not be right for me to close without mentioning that. Tamil Nadu has been in the forefront of adaptation of blockchain technology. Today, they are looking at a policy document and also use cases which will go way beyond only that which is in virtual domain. They are looking at expanding the application of blockchain technology from virtual to real world transactions. So when we are talking about a situation where policies are evolving for identifying and adapting the use of emerging technologies for public good. Aprajita mentioned a lot about the data protection aspect, very important, and also on non-personal data. So the non-personal data policy document also, when you look at it, again focuses on public good. AI talks about it as AI for all. So we need a strategy document today for blockchain for all, and that will give certainty to an innovator, certainty to an investor, and also certainty to the users in terms of adaptation of this technology. And this is the support and strength that law can actually bring to the table. So on this positive note, and considering that India is poised to bring in new criminal laws, new cybersecurity laws, and its national cybersecurity strategy, my hope is, be it with respect to cryptocurrencies, because I know all of you all have a lot of thoughts about the IMAI judgment and the concerns that it brings up, right? But very clearly, all that it has done is it struck down an RBI circular. I've always mentioned that there was no ban on cryptocurrency in India. All that RBI did was it blocked the use of banking and payment systems for the use of cryptocurrencies, and that has been struck down. I do have my reservations about the correctness of the judgment, but that is irrelevant. Today, we are in a situation where there is still uncertainty with respect to cryptocurrencies. Possibly the amendments to the criminal law provisions may bring in certainty in that aspect. One way or the other, I always believe certainty helps. Whether it is a yes or a no, we need certainty in terms of how law is going to be applied to technological innovations and its adaptations. We need certainty in terms of cybersecurity and the mode and manner. And there are huge use cases for which blockchain can come in, immensely useful for cybersecurity aspects also, including rooting out some of these financial frauds that are happening. That's why I touched upon Rohan's mention about fintech also. So there are huge potential for the use of blockchain for security and not just for facilitating fintech. And finally, for national security and for India to get its big part of the huge technology pie. So let us have law evolving a lot faster than what we have seen now, and certainly a policy document to begin with, which will enable and guide how laws could possibly evolve in this field. On that positive note, thank you all for having me here again, and over to you, Shiv.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I see that Prathiba ma'am wants to weigh in at this point, and before we move to questions, I'd give that opportunity to Prathiba ma'am. Ma'am, please, your comments.
I'm okay to take questions at this point. I've enjoyed all the presentations. So,
right. Thankfully, the organizers have given us a little additional time. So, a couple of questions that I have, ma'am, specifically to you, is with respect to issuing trademark protection to blockchain technology innovations and cryptocurrencies in India. What are your thoughts on this, ma'am?
well, I don't see any difficulty in trademarks being given. These are trademarks can be taken for any business. The question whether the business is legitimate, illegitimate is not something which the trademark office will go into. If it's a brand which will which will satisfy the basic conditions of the Trademark Act, any trademark can be protected. I don't see any difficulty in that.
Would anybody else want to weigh in?
See, I think the issue that has been raised primarily is about the patents aspect and not the trademarks. I think Justice Singh has clearly mentioned that about trademarks, there can be no issues. But the minute you talk about patents, now the very basis of blockchain technology is open source software and cryptography. So with it, I mean, as the name itself says, it is open source. The issue that or concern that arises probably is with respect to whether patenting a use case may result in blocking out the program, the software which is otherwise open source. So whenever you take an open source license, the license terms predicate what the usage can be. So we can talk about, and what Justice Singh's judgment in Farid Alani case refers to is the possibility of a patent, which is too important. So when you look at the way 3K has been interpreted and the perspective that, even from international perspective, when you look at it, and when you look at it particularly from the perspective of an innovator or an investor, you'll realize the importance of that judgment. You need the possibility, whether that is practically feasible in a given case. And that's why she said it's not like it's open and shut. It can be applied. It may or may not apply, right? And when she spoke about the Alice Corp judgment also, I would also strongly advise you to look at it, because it's very interesting in terms of perspective also. It talks about how an aggregator's rights are much lower than that of an innovator. So we are really talking about balancing an innovator's right as opposed to just somebody who's aggregating patents and trying to enforce it, etc. But anyway, coming back to the question that was asked, you have to understand that the license terms will also dictate whether there is a possibility of a patent at all or not. So there is no need for concern to automatically assume that there will be a kind of a closing down of the black box and, of constrictive innovation, rather than the kind of situation we have today, which is open-ended.
Right. Ma'am, just one last question to the entire panel. The recent, the order of the Telangana High Court with respect to the Telangana Land Records Management System, which is one of the first applications that we see in the public sphere, and the apprehensions of both people who are owners of agricultural and non-agricultural land, and in disclosure of their public documents, we see a lot of conflict there. What are your thoughts on this, ma'am, and how do we mitigate this?
The way I look at the order issued by the High Court, it is primarily deriving from case Puttaswamy, and whether you can insist on an Aadhaar card being Aadhaar number being given for a immovable asset registration. So it surrounds around the same discussion what Aprajita raised about privacy, whether privacy should be protected, and whether giving of Aadhaar is violating privacy or not. So it is just an interim order. The way I would look at it is the case would have to be argued finally, and they'll have to see whether, and I'm sure this is going to travel right till the Supreme Court. And Dharani as the portal, I would see is a portal based on blockchain technology, from what I understand, and therefore this is the first thing that we've seen, and this kind of a conflict, in fact, leads to a proper evolution of the law.
Correct.
And I think that the law will evolve, and so long as privacy can be protected, and we should obviously not make privacy kind of a ghost which tries to block technology. We should always have the balance in mind, and then proceed further. That's what I would think.
Again, see, the one issue that seems to be missed out in terms of this concern that is raised because of this judgment also is, automatically, when you develop a blockchain technology or a use case, you would take into account whether it is going to involve a privacy issue. You would not, and you would not develop a blockchain technology. Right. Privacy is going to be an issue. So naturally, the protection is built into it, and we don't have to apprehend that because the technology ensures transparency, it will violate privacy, right? It's about how the technology is going to be used and for what purpose. So the purpose will naturally be restricted based on what will be the outcome.
Right.
So I really think, therefore, the explanation to the technology, of the technology to people involved in the legal sphere is what is important. Because as Nappinai is saying, blockchain has transparency coupled with security. Right? It's like the ultimate form of non-privacy compromise with transparency. So therefore, I think that this element of the technology needs to be discussed and put in public domain to be able to be appreciated by us judges and everybody. And when we start talking about it, I'm sure we'll all realize it.
Right. It's I guess it's about awareness, ma'am. I think awareness is the key factor here. Ma'am, shall we just move on to a few audience questions quickly? We're running short of time. Shall we take the first?
There are many which talk about policy issues here.
I know, I understand. But what about the first one by Vimal Suresh? What about the legal stand of contracts and agreements created on blockchain smart contracts with the consent of parties? Rohan, do you want to come in on this?
Sure. So, see, as far as the legality of smart contracts is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, as long as the smart contract fulfills all the attributes of a valid contract under the Indian contract law, which is an offer, an acceptance, a lawful consideration, and the parties being competent, I think that should fulfill all the requirements. I think the issue which will need to be addressed as and when we do look at amendments in various laws is that issue of whether human involvement can be done away with when it comes to consent, because the smart contract is actually created on a computer program, a code. So the question which really arises is how do you fulfill the meeting of minds requirement as far as that is concerned. So I think there has also been a lot of discussion in terms of some contracts or some kind of contracts being good for smart contracts use case, others not. To my mind, I think there could be scenarios where hybrid solution could be carved out, where a traditional contract is subsequently converted into a smart contract to make certain automatic execution possible. So that is also something which has been discussed. Unfortunately, we don't have too many use cases in India so far, but I'm sure the jurisprudence will evolve once we have these applications coming in India.
Right. Ma'am, I think we are running short of time. Is there anything else that anyone wants to weigh in on or speak about? Good. So to conclude, thank you so much, everyone. Let me just, firstly, I'd like to thank the Kerala Blockchain Academy for this opportunity. And specifically, Dr. Elizabeth Shirley, Director, IIITM Kerala, Mr. Madhavan Nambiar Sir, Director, IIITM Kerala, Professor Ashraf and Adarsh for this great initiative, Mr. Franklin, who helped us with the tech support, and every member of the organizing committee for putting on such a great show. I wish all the attendees across the globe a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you so much.